Good evening, and thank you all for joining us tonight. We will start our program with a video clip of a conversation several of the descendants of families who had lived for some 80 years on Broad Branch Road had earlier this spring with the Reverend William H. Lamar IV of Metropolitan AME Church. But first, a brief scene setting. 2 decades before the Civil War, a small enclave of free African Americans settled on a parcel of land then called Dry Meadows. We know it today as Lafayette Pointer Park. Like their white neighbors, they were farmers and laborers, contributing members of the community and the economy. But by the early 20th century, the surrounding farmland had transformed into a suburban street grid, and it became increasingly clear that African Americans were no longer welcome there. The parcels you see on the map in purple were taken in different ways and at different times, the last holdouts by eminent domain. The Chevy Chase community needed space for a new school, and although other undeveloped land was still plentiful, the site was selected and support for the whites-only school was widespread. But where were these families to go? The Harrises, the Modens, the Hysons, the Shorters, and the Johnsons. They all scattered, some going to Reno and some to Georgetown, only to be displaced yet again. Without a home site, the aunts and uncles, cousins and second cousins, longtime neighbors eventually lost touch and forgot their shared history. By the time Lafayette Elementary School opened its doors in 1931, their land had been scrubbed free of any evidence that it had once been a black space. Only a notion survived that there had been an African American settlement in the area. Tanya Hardy, who you will meet soon, a genealogist and historian, had been helping James Fisher dig into his family tree and had learned about the community on Broad Branch. At roughly the same time, other historians, Barbara Torrey and Claire Green, investigating their own neighborhood, came across George Pointer and his history in the National Archives. Ancestry.com served as the connector that introduced these two efforts to each other. An oral history interview that James and Tanya did in 2016 first brought the story to our attention at HCCDC. Torrey and Green published their book in 2021, and the work continues. HCCDC partnered with the University of District of Columbia in 2021 to conduct oral histories of the Broad Branch descendants, in part to understand how the actions taken by the community of Chevy Chase, D.C. fit into the arc of race in American history. In the clips that follow, we meet first Shirley Turner, an eighth-generation descendant of George Pointer and granddaughter of Rose Harris, one of the last to leave Dry Meadows. Her younger brother James is next, followed by Jocelyn Julienne from the Shorter Dorsey family.
As far as our ancestors concerned, when we left, I believe when we left the eminent domain and we dispersed, we scattered, and we didn't have the wisdom of the elders in that particular community. So it was chaos. Our family was just chaotic. We had the women who suffered from alcoholism. We had the men who suffered from drug abuse. So we went into survival mode and couldn't get out.
I was very sensitive to racism as a very small child. So it was a very, very dominant stain in my life and growing up. I had some very serious and deep questions. And history wasn't very available to me to, explore and questions answered. But it's been a long journey. We're in a great place now where Black history exceeds a month per year. So information about Black history is is available now. And I'm glad to see this happen.
I work with the court system. And so I see a lot of young people and adults come through who are in conflict. And when I started this endeavor, one of the things that I kept saying is it's important for education. You know, my passion is to reach out to the youth to share with them what I know so that they'll know and have a sense of purpose and grounding.
And I traveled a lot and I've seen a lot. But George Pointer, the story of George Pointer touched me because it made me realize why I think the way I think, who I am. It made me see that it brought life to the stories that I've been reading all my life. And it gave me, and surely it's not anger. I'm telling you, it's not anger. I don't have anger, I have pain.
I noticed that, our family was traumatized. And I asked myself the question, were we ever unified? And I found the answer when I learned about the farm, because we were so unified because a whole lot of Black people were unified back then. There had to be. It was a method of survival and thriving. I can go on and on about George Pointer and the family farm. And I mean, learning that, we were freed. We were free for so long. And the Harris brothers, you finding them first in line to enlist the fight for freedom of for all, and so many others that were free did the same thing.
I heard bits and pieces about, we had entrepreneurs in our family. Some lived in Georgetown. Some were shoemakers. Some were owned a funeral parlor. But just bits and pieces. We never met them. We didn't know the names. We never met them.
When you learned about this history, how has it impacted your lives? And how did it change how you saw yourselves? Mm-hmm. And, how you envision what your future will be because you've learned this story?
I really wish I knew about him when I was a child, because I really didn't have a male role model. And his story, may have been life-changing for me.
It was huge because all of a sudden the family realized, oh my, we really do have a fantastic story to tell of an ancestor who was powerful, who was smart.
This is a real eye-opener for me because I'm living it now. I'm living in a racist community, and I pose questions to both my sisters as to how I'm being approached in my own community. It's blatant.
They did not give up. And so I was just so proud of that. And that's what we're missing today. We're missing in our young men and our young women. The story needs to be told, not only in the Black community, but in the white community.
Learning my history from, my fourth great grandmother, Caroline Branham, it has given me a sense of pride that I think I lacked in myself and my people. Because of all of the atrocities, it made me feel like I wanted to go under a rock, at times. So in learning about Broad Branch and what they had to endure and what they built and what was taken away, only to continue to succeed and do what they needed to do to get by, there's nothing that can't stop me. It really has given me a sense of purpose.
That's beautiful.
Yes.
What is this story, Sister Shirley? What would you say? What has this story meant for you?
A sense of pride, like I was saying before. Once I learned about the story, I was just so proud to be an African American. It's just a sense of pride. their tenacity, their entrepreneurship, the wisdom, the focus, never giving up, never giving up. They didn't get stuck in anger. And I'm going to keep bringing that. Don't get stuck in anger, because you can't move forward in anger.
Right.
And so it's just a sense of pride. And also it just makes me want to serve more.
My ancestor, Caroline Branham, right down to my grandmother, all of the females in my family were strong-minded, determined, and for obvious reasons wanted to hand down our history. So they did it in various different ways. And coming down to my grandmother, Anna Shorter Chambers, she documented by taking pictures, which in that time period from the early 20s and whatnot, didn't happen. We couldn't afford cameras. We were not a rich family. We were just getting by. But somehow she was able to get a camera and film and document what she saw. And it is quite profound. Some of the pictures that she collected over the time. But she also wanted to give oral history as well. So I feel a very close bond with my grandmother, but also my fourth great grandmother, because of the trials and tribulations that they went through and their eagerness to share that story, because it was handed down from her all the way down to my grandmother and to me.
I thank you for your very honest portrayal about the challenges in the family.
Mm-hmm.
But the same, so we did not have in that day the language of trauma and re-traumatization, and these human beings reacted and dealt with trauma the way that human beings deal with trauma. What might you say about that when you first heard about this work and demurring and saying, maybe not, or why we don't tell these stories ourselves? What might you say about that?
I think our elders, I think that our descendants, once freed, they had planned, they had dreamed, and they had a plan. And it amazed me how quickly quite a few of them, got purchased farmland. Take Captain George Pointer. Once he got his freedom, he already had a bride waiting. They married a year after he was free. They had a baby the next year. The past couldn't do anything for them.
Mm-hmm.
They were just looking ahead. It was no time to look back, only forward.
One of my challenges with the African American Museum is that it presents a story of American progress that is linear, meaning that and Obama did this type of rhetoric, which I think is very dangerous, that America is always moving toward a more perfect union, and it is not. America might take 2 steps forward toward a more perfect union and 55 steps back, which we see today in taking away voting rights, which we see today in increased uses of white supremacy to build political power and all that kinds of stuff, and to use Black elected officials and Black people as shields for policies that harm the majority of Black people, the Black masses. So I hear from you all, and I respect what you're saying. I'm not so sure that things will get better.
I don't think it will ever come. We will always ride in the back of the bus as far as, waiting on, white people to be fair to us and give us our due. So hope is not there. I think that, where we dropped the ball is we allowed ourselves to be separated and by class, by many other things. And it became, I'm gonna get mine. I can't worry about you.
I believe it was a generation that was lost because of division, separation, and no hope. Without vision, people perish. And so I believe we have hope if the African American community will get together and start working with one another to solve the problem with this generation. That's where my hope is. No, I don't think racism is going to ever end. Then it's not going to end. Even from the beginning, it's always been different classes of people.
So over the years, you know, as I said, I was a genealogist. I did a lot of research on finding out things about families. And I started mentioning that to some young men that were in a class that I taught for students who were having severe behavior problems. And I said, I found information about my great-grandparents I didn't know about, and I told them a little bit about that. And I said, and you all can do this too. And I was really surprised when these young men who were in trouble all the time, half of them couldn't read well, but they wanted to know, well, if you found that out, did I have a granddaddy or did I have a great-granddaddy? Some of them didn't even, so it kind of helped me to understand if we do something for our kids in that manner, teach them in that manner, find ways to do it in churches or community centers or whatever, then we can help them to understand that they're better than who they think they are, that they don't have to be in trouble all the time, that we were mighty people.
When you learned of this history, some of you said at first you were kind of hesitant to engage it, but you're here tonight. And to me, because our ancestors did not spend a lot of time talking about the past, they were looking forward. Based on what you have learned about the past, where ought we to go? Now, the people who are now in Chevy Chase who will hear these stories, what do you want them to know and what must be done? Because justice doesn't come from having conversations. It costs something.
I want to see justice. Before I die, I want to see justice given to all of them. I want to see justice. That's my main goal.
You know what I think of? My first thing that I think of when you say that, Reverend Lamar, is peace. I would love to just have peace back. I don't have peace.
This is such a typical kind of African cosmology answer, because you're not saying I want money. You're not saying I want the land back. You're saying, you know, those who are wealthy have the tangible things, yet we still desire the intangible. This is an amazing thing to me.
I mean, you have to have war to get that peace. I would definitely, I've said this over and over again, and I quieted rooms. I would like to see Black people receive a similar package that the Native Americans receive. And those who are inclined to, you know, we create our own laws, we discipline our children the way we want to discipline. We have a curriculum to include Black history. We have our own police force, and et cetera. And with the federal government would support the success of it. Black USA.
The residents in the Chevy Chase community, some of the things that you hear is, well, it wasn't me, I didn't do this or whatever, it wasn't me. But they must realize that they benefited from the tragedies, the crimes so they benefited from it. So they need to, it's all about learning. They need to understand or need to know what happened.
I mean,
That's
I
right.
think the National Museum of African American History and Culture, as beautiful as it is, in ways is an attempt at mint julep history to say we were always going to do right, but no. And so what we have to figure out is somewhere there is an intersection between this brutality, but also this strong resolve to live and thrive in spite of it all. But it should not be so difficult to thrive.
Right. Exactly.
You should not have to have these shackles. And
Exactly.
so for those who are watching this, for those who are trying to learn from your stories, we've talked and I've asked you a number of ways, what ought they to do? What ought be their responsibility? We cannot diminish the fact that this is about violence and land and wealth and anti-Blackness and imperialism and white domination and hegemonic control. But it is also extraordinarily spiritual, and it is traumatizing and re-traumatizing. If you pay attention to the United States Capitol, Washington, D.C., it is profoundly built on ancestral presence, statues, monuments, buildings. They're very clear that they want you to revere ancestors, just not your own. We want you to think about what you would suggest that people do with this story. How do we move forward? What kind of world do we create? As I share with those with whom I do community organizing work, we can't go back and change the past, but we can do the hard work of building a new world together.
Before we start the live program, we also want to thank Professor Amanda Huron at the University of the District of Columbia and her colleague, Benji de la Piedro, who oversaw the Oral History Project, and to her students, and of course to our colleagues, the Descendants, whose roots in our community are deeper than any others. Two of the students, Mariana Barros-Titas and Corey Shaw, have ensured that the project has grown wings as they work with educators to develop a curriculum to teach this important history in the DC schools and beyond. And credit as well to the Reverend William Lamar for his thoughtful and moving leadership of the conversation that now continues live. Let me invite those to whom most credit is due, the Descendants, to join us live to continue with their stories in this conversation. The Reverend Lamar will lead that discussion.